I want to remarry at 64. My son thought it was too soon. My sister thought I was lonely enough to make a bad decision. Maybe they were both right. My wife passed 3 years before I met Darlene. Pancreatic cancer. 61 days from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through all of it, and when it was over, I didn't know what to do with my hands anymore. I'd reach for her in the morning without thinking. I'd start to call her name when I heard something funny on the news. Grief does that to you. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the house with you, quiet, using all the oxygen. I kept busy. That's what people tell you to do, and for once they're right. I have a laundromat on Clement Street and another one out near the park, both in San Francisco. Been running them since 1997. My wife and I started with one machine and a prayer, and by the time she got sick, we had 2 full locations, a small storage unit we rented out, and enough set aside that neither of us would ever have to panic again. She worked the books. I worked the machines. We were a team in the way that old couples become teams, wordlessly, completely. After she passed, I kept running the business. It gave me somewhere to be at 6 in the morning. My son Terrence, he checked in on me, called every Sunday. Good boy. He got his mother's patience and her eyes. He worried I was isolating, and he wasn't wrong. I met Darlene at a grief support group at my church. She'd lost her husband 2 years prior. Heart attack, she said, very sudden. She had this way of listening when other people spoke, completely still, like the words actually landed somewhere inside her instead of just bouncing off. I noticed it. You notice things like that when you're lonely. We started getting coffee after the sessions. Then dinners. She was warm and funny, and she laughed at things I said that weren't even that funny. I like that. When you've been with someone for 31 years and then suddenly you're eating dinner alone, having someone laugh at your jokes again feels like being given something back that you didn't realize you'd lost. I want to be honest with myself here, even if it's uncomfortable. I think I was careful about one thing and reckless about everything else. The one careful thing, I never told Darlene what I owned. I wasn't trying to deceive her, not exactly. I'd read enough stories, heard enough from guys at the barber shop, to know that money changes things. My friend Augustus lost half his retirement to a woman he'd known 8 months. My cousin remarried, and his new wife had her adult kids moved in before the ink was dry on the license. I wasn't paranoid. I was just cautious in the way a person gets cautious after they've watched too many things go wrong for people they love. So I told Darlene I worked at the laundromat, which is true. I am there 4 mornings a week. I open up, I check the machines, I talk to the regulars. She saw me there once in my work clothes, counting quarters, and she just accepted it. I made a decent living, I told her. Nothing fancy. I drove my old Buick. I dressed the way I always dressed. Clean, nothing expensive. My house is nice, but not flashy. A 3-bedroom in the Sunset District that my wife and I bought in 2003 and paid off entirely. I let Darlene assume it was just a regular house with a regular mortgage. I'm not proud of the deception. But I want you to understand the reasoning, even if the reasoning was flawed. I had been burned by loneliness into someone who wanted to be chosen for who he was, not what he had. We dated for 8 months. She met Terrence twice. He was polite, the way he gets when he's reserving judgment. Afterward, he said, "She seems fine, Dad. Not enthusiastic, just fine." I told myself he was being protective. She had a daughter, Keisha, early 30s, who I met maybe 3 times. Keisha was pleasant enough on the surface, but there was something watchful about her, something calculating in the way she looked around my house. I chalked it up to her being protective of her mother. I know now I should have trusted that first read. Darlene and I got married on a Saturday in March. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. My sister Roberta cried. My son gave a toast that was gracious and measured and careful like everything Terrence does. Darlene looked beautiful. I felt something that day that I hadn't felt in years, a kind of lightness, like maybe the hard part was finally over. I should have known something was off when she suggested we skip a honeymoon entirely. "We can take a trip later," she said. "There's no rush. Let's just settle in." I thought that was sensible. Looking back, I think she had things to do. The first night was fine. We had dinner at home, opened a bottle of wine her friends had given us. Everything seemed normal. I fell asleep feeling cautiously happy. The second day of our marriage, a Sunday, Darlene sat me down at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her, the way someone sits when they've been rehearsing something. Keisha was there too. I hadn't known she was coming. She was sitting in the living room scrolling her phone like she lived there, which she did not, which was something I registered but didn't comment on. "I've been thinking," Darlene started, "about our finances." I said, "Okay, I think we should really combine everything. Start fresh, as a couple." She smiled. "It's the right way to start a marriage." I told her I thought that was a conversation worth having, that I was open to it, but that I'd want to sit down with a financial advisor before making any big moves. Standard stuff. Nothing alarming. She nodded, but something shifted in her face. Just slightly. Then she said, "I was also thinking about this house." I waited. It's a lot of space for two people. And the market right now, houses in the Sunset are going for so much. If we sold and moved somewhere smaller, we'd have a significant amount of cash. We could invest it, travel, really live. I kept my face neutral. This house has been in my family for over 20 years. I understand that, but things change. She reached across and put her hand on mine. "We're building something new." I said I'd think about it. I got up and refilled my coffee. That evening, I went to the laundromat. I needed to be somewhere that made sense. I sat in the back office, the one with the old cork board where my wife used to pin receipts, and I thought about the conversation. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Not the big, obvious wrong you see coming. The small, careful wrong that's been planned out in advance. I called Terrence. He answered on the second ring, which is how I knew he was worried too. He'd been waiting for me to call. "She asked about selling the house," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's been 2 days, Dad." "I know. That's not a normal conversation to have 2 days after the wedding." "No," I said, "it's not." He came over the next morning. While Darlene was visiting Keisha, Terrence and I sat at the kitchen table, and he pulled up what he'd found. He hadn't said anything to me before the wedding because he hadn't wanted to upset me on something he couldn't prove, but he'd been looking. Terrence works in finance and he knows how to look. Darlene's late husband hadn't left her much. There were debts. Her apartment was rented. Keisha had a small claims judgment against her from a former landlord. Darlene herself had filed for bankruptcy 7 years ago. None of this was secret exactly. It was all findable if you looked in the right places. I just hadn't looked. "She's not a widow who landed on her feet," Terrence said quietly. "She's been looking for a landing pad." I sat with that for a long time. That afternoon, when Darlene came home, she was in a good mood. She'd brought pastries from the bakery she liked. She kissed me on the cheek and started talking about a vacation she'd been researching. A cruise, somewhere warm. "We deserve it," she said. "A real honeymoon." "I thought we were skipping the honeymoon to settle in," I said. She laughed it off. "I just meant we didn't need to rush off right away. But now I think we should celebrate." I asked how much the cruise cost. She told me, and it was not a small number. She said we could use savings or maybe just take out a small line of credit, just to start things off right. She'd pay it back from her account once she transferred everything over. "What account?" I said. "When we combine finances," she said. "I have some things I need to settle first, but once that's done—" "What things?" She waved her hand. "Just some old business, nothing serious." I thought about the bankruptcy. I thought about the small claims judgment against Keisha. I thought about the rehearsed way she'd sat down at the table with her hands folded on that second morning. I didn't say any of that. I said the cruise sounded nice and I'd look into it. What I actually did was call my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she has been handling my business affairs for 11 years. She is thorough and skeptical, and she does not sugarcoat. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Have you told her what you own?" "No," I said. "Good," she said. Don't, not yet. Patricia looked into some things on her end. What she found confirmed what Terence had found and then went further. Darlene had been married once before her late husband, a marriage that had ended badly, with allegations of financial misconduct that were settled quietly. Patricia didn't say more than that, but she didn't need to. The picture was clear enough. I went home that evening and I watched my wife make dinner, and I felt the specific grief of realizing you have made an enormous mistake. It is different from other kinds of grief. It has shame in it. It has anger underneath the shame. And under the anger, if you're honest, there is the terrible sadness of understanding why you were vulnerable to this in the first place. I missed my wife, my real wife, the one who knew how I took my coffee and why I went quiet sometimes and what it meant when I laughed too loud. I had been so hungry for that feeling again that I hadn't checked whether the person I was reaching toward deserved to be reached for. The following week, Darlene asked again about the house. This time she had numbers. She'd looked up comparable sales in the neighborhood, had a figure in mind, mentioned a real estate agent a friend had recommended. I haven't agreed to sell, I said. I know, I'm just gathering information, being practical. It's my house, I said. My name is on the deed. I'd need to choose to sell it. She went still. Our house, she said. We're married. In California, property owned before marriage generally stays separate property, I said, which is something Patricia had made sure I understood very clearly, unless it's formally transferred. Darlene's face did something then that I hadn't seen before. The warmth didn't leave slowly. It left all at once. You've been talking to a lawyer, she said. I have a lawyer for my business. It's not unusual. What business? She said. You work at a laundromat. And there it was. I said, I own the laundromat. She blinked. I own 2 of them, I said, and a storage property. And this house outright, no mortgage. And I have retirement accounts that are in my name and considerably larger than what you were probably expecting. The silence that followed was one of the longer silences of my life. I watched her recalculate. I watched her try to find the angle that still worked. I could see her doing it, her eyes moving slightly, the way a person's eyes move when they're running through options. And then I watched her realize there wasn't one. She hadn't known what she was actually dealing with. She'd married the night manager, not the owner, and the owner had different protections than the night manager. You lied to me, she finally said. I wasn't fully honest, I said. I'm sorry for that. This whole time, I wanted to know why you were choosing me, I said. I needed to know it was for the right reasons. She didn't have an answer to that. Maybe because there wasn't a good one. Keisha called that night. I didn't pick up. She called twice more. Then she sent a text that said they were going to contact a lawyer about marital assets. I forwarded it to Patricia, who called me back in 20 minutes to tell me they didn't have much of a case and she'd handle it. The following week, Darlene moved her things out. She didn't say much. There was no big scene. She took what she'd brought and a few things she'd added during the week she'd been here, and I let her take them because they didn't matter. When she left, the house went quiet again. But it was a different quiet than the years after my wife died. That quiet had felt like absence. This one felt like clarity. Terence came over that Friday and we ordered Thai food and watched a game, and he didn't say I told you so, which is the kind of son he is, the kind his mother raised. He did say after a while, "You okay?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Yeah," I said, "I will be. I'm not going to tell you I came out of this without damage. I let someone into my life who was looking for a transaction, not a partnership. I confused performance with character. I ignored the early signals because I wanted to be chosen, and wanting to be chosen badly enough will make you see things that aren't there. But I'll also tell you this. The lie I told, or the truth I withheld, it didn't protect my money. Money can be replaced. What it protected was something harder to name, some dignity, some clarity about who I am to the people who know me. My son still has a father he respects. My sister still has a brother who made a mistake, but caught it before it became a catastrophe. And I still have the house, the one my wife and I found together in 2003, when the market was different and we were younger and had no idea what we were building. Her handwriting is still on a notepad in the kitchen drawer. I found it a few months ago and I couldn't throw it away. It says call plumber, Thursday, in her handwriting, and I have no idea which Thursday, from which year, for which problem, and it doesn't matter. It's her handwriting. It's still in my kitchen. It's still my house. 64 is not too old to make a mistake. It is also not too old to know one when you're finally looking at it clearly. I'm not in a hurry anymore. I don't think loneliness is a reason to stop being careful. My wife waited until she was 33 to marry me, and she told me once that every year she'd waited had made her more certain when she finally knew. I didn't understand it when she said it. I understand it now. If you're watching this and you're somewhere in the middle of a mistake or somewhere near the beginning of one, trust what you know, not what you want, not what would be convenient. What you actually know in the part of yourself that has been right about things before and will be right again if you let it. That part doesn't lie. I've learned to listen to it. I've thought a lot about what Darlene actually cost me. Not the money. She didn't get any of that. Not the house, not the laundromats, not anything I'd spent 30 years building with my wife. Those stayed exactly where they were. What Darlene cost me was something harder to account for. The 6 months I spent believing I had found something real, and the specific ache of watching that belief dissolve at a kitchen table on the third morning of a marriage that was never actually what I thought it was. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell you to protect yourself. They talk about prenups and separate accounts and getting a lawyer, all of which is good advice. But they don't tell you about the grief that comes after the anger, the grief of realizing you were lonely enough to miss the signs. I wasn't stupid. I was hungry for something I'd lost, and that hunger made me see what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. Darlene made a choice. She looked at a man she thought was a laundromat worker with a nice enough house, and she calculated what she could get from that. She performed warmth, performed interest, performed everything a grieving man would need to see. And for a while it worked, because I let it work. I wanted it to work. That's not weakness exactly. It's human, but it's something I had to own before I could move past it. What stopped her wasn't luck. It was Terence, who loved me enough to look into things he didn't want to find. It was Patricia, who had been protecting my interests for 11 years and knew exactly what questions to ask. It was the quiet part of my own instincts, the part that noticed Keisha's eyes moving around the room, the part that registered the rehearsed way Darlene sat down at that table, the part I kept talking myself out of because I didn't want to be the kind of person who suspects everyone. The truth is that being careful and being open are not opposites. You can want real connection and still ask hard questions. You can be hopeful and still pay attention. Intelligence isn't about being cold or suspicious. It's about being honest with yourself about what you're actually seeing, even when what you're seeing is inconvenient. Darlene's plan unraveled not because of anything dramatic. It unraveled because the facts were what they were. She'd calculated based on wrong information, and when the real information came out, there was nothing left to hold the plan together. That's how it works usually, not with a confrontation or a revelation, just with reality eventually being too heavy to carry around an untruth. I'm not angry at her anymore. I was, for a while, not a hot anger, a cold and tired one. But I understand now that what she did says nothing about my worth and everything about hers. My son still calls every Sunday. My sister still checks in. The house is still mine. The handwriting on that notepad in the kitchen drawer is still there. I made a mistake, and I caught it before it became a catastrophe. That's enough. That has to be enough. 64 is not the end of anything. But I'm done being in a hurry. The right kind of person, when they come, will not make me feel like I have to close my eyes to see them clearly.